Welcome to my spoiler-heavy review for The Revenge of Frankenstein from 1958, a sequel to The Curse of Frankenstein from 57. The story continues exactly where the previous one left off, with Frankenstein heading to the gallows to pay for his crimes against humanity. But at the last minute, he escapes, flees to another town, changes his identity, and continues with his experiments in secret. So clearly, he's learned absolutely nothing from his brush with the executioner. All that pleading with Paul at the end of the first film was just for show, just to try and save his own skin. We learn about 10 minutes into this film that this man will continue to try and give reanimation to the world for as long as he lives and breathes. I'm not sure that revenge is the right word for the film, though. It's not like he's trying to build an army of Frankensteins in this sequel to storm the courthouse to try and get them back for sentencing him to death. His goal is ultimately the same as it was the first time around. He just wants to have his science out there and being used by humanity. He wants recognition, not revenge. Now, Peter Cushing is back as Frankenstein, which is obviously good, but there's no Paul and Elizabeth. They do not return, and indeed we will not see them now for the rest of the series. They are done, which is a shame, especially in Paul's case. What this does, though, is give us a different dynamic in the lab assistant role. Frankenstein does get some more help for this film, not that he was looking for it. And it comes in the form of this junior medical doctor called Hans Gleave. Now, unlike Paul from the first film, this guy genuinely seems to believe in the work. And it's not like he's some kind of corporate guy who smells the pound signs or is coming at it from a different angle. He seems to genuinely share his mentor's belief that the world needs this science. And it's interesting seeing somebody hang on Frankenstein's every word, be his buddy. It's just a nice change-up, and it's definitely one of my biggest positives about the film. I'm not so keen on the monster. I much preferred Christopher Lee's more oddball version from Curse. What they essentially come up with this time is just a human being. He looks like a human, he talks like a human, he can string full sentences together. They must have saved a few pounds in the makeup department with this one. They probably saved a few pounds on Christopher Lee's salary, actually, but the only reason why he doesn't survive the move in the end is because he's psychologically damaged from the experiment. His body starts to reject what's happened after a day or so. He does kill a couple of people before he goes down, but it doesn't feel like he's escaped for more than 5 minutes before this happened. Although, like I said in my review for the first film, this is not a slasher series. It's mainly a drama about one man's obsession to create life from nothing and society's pushback against that. Now, it's a much bigger cast this time around. It feels like there are a lot of external threats to the workshop of Frankenstein and Cleve. We know that they're going to get their downfall at some point, but we don't know where that's going to come from precisely. Possibly it will come from the earwigging janitor who always seems to be hanging around the homeless shelter that's sort of a front for the experiments. This guy would sell his own grandmother if you give him half a chance. He's that sort of character. And he's got this weird thing where he doesn't believe in cleaning himself. He comes out with this long speech at one point about how if it's good enough for animals not to clean, it's good enough for him. It's really weird. This woman comes up to him with a bunch of stuff she's just brought back from the shop, and she says something like, "So, do you want anything? I've got soap, tobacco." And he's like, "Ooh, I'll take some tobacco if you don't mind me saying." I mean, he reminds me of Benny from The Mummy. I mean, if this guy was hanging around during the First World War, he'd be a deserter. He'd go and hang in a farmhouse somewhere, and he'd explain it away by saying, "Oh, well, all those bullets, they're bad for your health, aren't they?" There's this other funny character later on who I don't think has a name, but he's on this date with this blonde girl who ends up getting killed, but that's a bit later. But instead of getting down and dirty with this blonde on the way home, he takes her to this patch of grass and starts talking to her about ants. I mean, she's just sat there like thinking, this isn't what I signed on for with this date. And he seems completely oblivious to the fact he's got this hot blonde right next to him, is into him, and he's just talking about ants. It's just odd. Eunice Gayson is in this film. Now, this is notable for me because I mainly remember her for playing the role of Sylvia Trench in the James Bond films Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And bizarrely, she was dubbed in both of those films. So assuming this is her real voice in this one, she's playing a character called Margaret, then it's weird to finally hear what she sounds like. And oddly enough, her voice sounds better in this than the fake voice they gave her in James Bond. So it's really odd. One of the cleverest things about the film is the ending. It's totally out of left field, completely unpredictable. Incidentally, if you've still not seen it and you don't want me to spoil the ending for you, I'll give you one last chance to get out. 3, 2, 1. So basically, Frankenstein gets completely beaten to death by the cripples in the homeless shelter, which is totally out of the blue because these guys have spent the entire movie looking about as threatening as Charlie Bucket's bedridden grandparents. The reason they do it is because Dr. Steen gets outed as the famous Baron Frankenstein, wanted all over Europe, which we sort of spend a lot of the movie fearing would happen. But in the very next scene, Frankenstein, in his dying breaths, hints to Cleve that he should try and transfer his brain to a new body, therefore saving him. And obviously this works, because we then flash forward to the future where we see Frankenstein with a moustache and a new changed identity, and he's still with Cleve. So he himself has become the first successful experiment, which is a brilliant ending. I mean, I'm a bit hazy on the execution, because there's no way that he should still have his face looking perfect like that. You know, it was clearly beaten to a bloody pulp by the cripples. And even in today's world, it would be difficult to rebuild a face that perfectly, and damn near impossible back then. Later films would just completely ignore the fact that Frankenstein's had this body swap, but that's for a future day. My only real negative about the film is the first 10 minutes. I mean, I'm just at a loss as to what's going on half the time in the opening. Frankenstein escapes the gallows because there's this character called Carl who just happens to be overseeing the whole thing. And the reason why he wants Frankenstein to escape is because he wants his help in getting him a new body. He hates being a cripple. The executioner just happens to be in cahoots with Carl, and they both have this plan to murder an innocent priest in Frankenstein's place. It's a stretch, especially as we learn later in the film that Carl is quite a timid character. But then there's this secondary scene where we see these two characters in the pub planning to dig up Frankenstein's grave, presumably the same night. But I don't know why they're doing this. I rewatched the first 10 minutes just before this review just to see if there's something I missed. But no, I've still no idea what's going on. Just as these two characters are digging up the grave, Frankenstein comes out of the shadows and looks surprised that they're there. One of them has a heart attack and falls in the grave. Tell me what is going on with this opening. I have no idea. It's a mystery to me. But once we're past the opening 10 minutes, the rest of the film, absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It's got a great setting. I like how it feels like part 2 of a story and not just some randomly thrown together sequel. I mean, apparently the writer Jimmy Sangster did consider the first film a closed story and had to be persuaded back to write a part 2. But if that's the case, then creatively he did very well to make this seamlessly almost fit onto the end of number 1, apart from the Night of the Gallows, which is a bit confusing, but on the whole did very well, I think. The story's funny at times. It's got a plot that's very hard to read, and all these characters and factions are set up, and yet not too many that we feel confused. But honestly, you have no idea watching this film where Frankenstein's downfall is going to come from. Will it be from the medical council, the janitor, Margaret somehow? Will the creature turn on him? Will Cleve do a Paul and turn 180 degrees halfway through the film? The last thing I expected was the cripples to do what they do. So it's a really good story in that sense, that it keeps you guessing, keeps you on edge all the way through. Is it as good as The Curse of Frankenstein? I would say no, but that film is on such a lofty perch that there's no shame in that. I mean, when I think of Frankenstein, I don't think anything is going to beat the memory of Paul and Frankenstein working in that drafty castle with the two women looking over their shoulders, and of course Christopher Lee. But I'm still a fan of The Revenge of Frankenstein. I think it's a very good sequel and a very good film. So let's get to the bag of terror and find out what score we've got for it. A few axes in here. 1, 2, 3. We've got 3.5 bloody axes out of 5 for The Revenge of Frankenstein. That's a very good score. I think that just falls half an axe short of The Curse of Frankenstein's score of 4 out of 5, but still, I'm very impressed, and I'm looking forward to reviewing the next one coming very soon. So that's all for today. I will see you again another time. Bye-bye.